There's something I learned early on in this life out in the country. Something I only fully understood many years later. When you depend on the land, when you live far from the city and have to make a living from whatever nature provides around you, water becomes just as important as the soil itself. There's no garden without water, no harvest without water, no life without water. And for years I believed that good water meant store-bought water, treated water, filtered by expensive machines that break down, need replacement parts, and rely on electricity. I thought that was the way, until the day I found a note in an old notebook that belonged to my grandfather. A yellowed page filled with small handwriting, describing a method used by soldiers in the field during wartime to drink water from rivers' puddles, any available source, and survive. No filter, no chemical tablets, nothing you'd have to buy from a store. And when I tested it for the first time, standing there by the creek on my land, holding that clear water in my hand, I remember thinking, how is it possible that nobody teaches this anymore? I know you've been in that situation before. The hose runs dry in the middle of summer. The tap water starts tasting off. The well changes colour after a heavy rain, or maybe you're out on your land far from home, thirsty, staring at a thin stream running over a rock and wondering, can I drink that? I've been there more times than I can count. And for a long time, the answer I kept giving myself was always the same. Wait until you get home. Wait until you have a filter. Wait until you're sure. But the older folks I grew up around didn't wait. They knew what to do. And what they knew was so simple. It's hard to believe it's been forgotten. The method I'm going to walk you through in this video was documented during World War II by military units operating in remote areas without regular supply access. These soldiers had to move fast. They had to survive using whatever they could find along the way, and water was one of their biggest challenges. They couldn't carry heavy filters. They couldn't depend on tablets that run out. So they used what nature provided, and it worked, not because it was some cheap trick, but because it was a precise application of knowledge that ancient peoples had mastered for centuries. What those soldiers did was rediscover something that Native Americans, medieval farmers, and subsistence growers all over the world already knew and practiced. And I'm going to show it to you the way I learned it. Simple, direct, and with a full explanation of why it works. But before we get into the method itself, there's something I need to tell you. Something that took me years to truly understand. Water isn't dirty by accident. When you collect water from a river, a spring, a pond, or even rain that has fallen onto the ground, that water carries everything it has touched along the way. It carries particles of soil, decomposing organic matter, animal waste, fungi, bacteria, and many other things your eyes can't see. Most people look at cloudy water and think, that's visible dirt. Once it's clear, it's clean. But it doesn't work like that, because the visible contamination is the easiest part to deal with. The real problem is what you can't see. And that's exactly where this old method works in a way most people don't expect. My grandfather had a kind of knowledge I took far too long to appreciate. He never went to an agricultural college. never read a manual on water purification, but he knew the plants in our region like they were family. He knew their names, what they did, and what they were useful for, beyond what most people could see. And one thing he used to say over and over again was this: nature doesn't create a problem and leave the solution somewhere else. The solution is always close to the problem. When I finally understood what that meant, a lot changed in the way I approached life on the land. The method those soldiers used during World War II combines two elements that anyone can find or prepare using what they already have at home or out on their land. The first element is a physical filtration system using natural materials layered in a specific order. The second is a purifying agent that comes directly from nature, not from a lab, and has the ability to eliminate harmful microorganisms without significantly altering the taste of the water. When these two elements are combined in the right sequence, the result is water that can be safely consumed, even when it comes from sources that look completely unsafe. I'm going to break down each of these elements step by step, because every detail matters. But before that, I want to ask you something. Have you ever tried growing your own food and felt like you were fighting everything at once? Pests showing up out of nowhere, drought hitting at the worst possible time, soil that doesn't respond the way you expected, and that feeling that you're doing everything right, but nothing works the way it should. I want to know if you've been through that, because if you have, you're not alone. A lot of people who start chasing food independence go through that silent frustration, that moment where you look at your garden and think you're not going to make it. If you've been there, or if you're there right now, tell me down in the comments. You can simply write, "I've tried to grow my own food, and it wasn't easy." That comment isn't just for me. It's for everyone reading down there who needs to know they're not walking this path alone. Because when we share what we've been through, we strengthen those who are just getting started. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, now's a good time to do it. Here, we talk about old field-tested knowledge that actually works. How to grow food with more independence, more simplicity, and less reliance on things you have to keep buying every week. If that speaks to you, go ahead and subscribe. You won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the method. The first element is layered filtration. And here's the detail that took me years to fully understand. The order of the layers matters just as much as the materials you use. It's not just about stacking things inside a cut bottle and letting the water drip through. There's a logic behind each layer's position. And when that logic is followed, the result is completely different from just throwing things together in any order. To build the physical filter, you'll need a container with an opening at the top and an outlet at the bottom. It can be a large plastic bottle cut in half, a can with a hole punched through the bottom, a piece of bamboo cut at the node, anything that can hold the layers and allow water to flow from top to bottom. The first layer, at the very bottom where the water exits, is made of small stones or clean gravel. This layer serves a structural purpose. It supports everything above it and ensures the outlet doesn't get clogged. There's no need for anything special here. Any clean river stones will do just fine. The second layer, right above the gravel, is coarse sand. And this is where something most people don't realize begins. Sand doesn't just filter particles. It also acts as a support surface for the most important element of the filter, which comes next. The coarse sand traps larger debris that made it past the gravel and prepares the water for the next stage. The third layer is where the real transformation happens. This is where soldiers, Native Americans, medieval farmers, and subsistence growers around the world concentrated their knowledge of water purification. This layer is made of charcoal, not store-bought charcoal with chemical additives, pure charcoal, made by burning wood without accelerants, the kind you can produce in a controlled fire or find in the ashes of a wood-burning stove. This charcoal is the heart of the filter. Now, I need to explain why charcoal does what it does, because this is the part that changes everything in how you understand the process. Charcoal has an internal structure filled with microscopic pores. When you look at a piece of charcoal, it seems solid. But inside, it's a maze of invisible tunnels, and those tunnels have the ability to attract and hold substances that pass through them. Chemists call this adsorption, which is different from absorption. In absorption, a substance is taken into the material like a sponge. In adsorption, it sticks to the surface, almost like it's magnetized. And charcoal does this with remarkable efficiency when it comes to bacteria, organic compounds, heavy metals, and even certain toxins that water can carry. Indigenous peoples across the Americas used wood charcoal to purify water long before any European civilization documented the process. Medieval farmers in Europe built charcoal and sand filters to treat contaminated well water. And during World War II, when survival units needed fast and practical methods, charcoal was once again taught as an essential resource in extreme conditions. Not because it was new, but because it worked, and it was available anywhere there was wood. Above the charcoal, you add another layer of sand, this time finer. This fine sand completes the filtration of suspended particles that weren't captured by the earlier layers. And at the very top, closing the filter, goes a layer of straw, moss, dry grass, or clean cotton cloth. This top layer is the first barrier the water meets as it enters. It traps larger debris right away, protecting the lower layers from clogging too quickly and extending the life of the entire system. When water passes through this 5-layer filter, it comes out the other end with its cloudiness completely removed, and with a large portion of biological contaminants either filtered out or trapped in the charcoal. But the method doesn't stop there. And this is where the second element comes in, the one soldiers used as a final purification step. This is where ancient knowledge meets a level of efficiency that modern science only confirmed decades later. That second element is silver, not polished jewelry-grade silver, not refined or processed materials, just silver in its simplest form. A solid silver object, a coin, a chain, a ring, or any piece of pure silver, placed into the already filtered water for a few hours. It sounds too simple to work. And that's exactly what I thought the first time I read about it in my grandfather's notebook. I thought it was superstition. I thought it was just folklore with no real foundation, but I kept reading, because my grandfather wasn't the kind of man to hold on to superstition. He held on to what worked. Silver has antimicrobial properties that have been documented for centuries. Ancient Greek and Roman civilizations used silver containers to store water and milk, noticing that these liquids lasted longer without spoiling. Persian travelers stored water in silver vessels during long journeys. Early physicians used silver instruments in procedures long before modern sterilization existed. And during World War II, when reconnaissance teams needed to ensure safe drinking water in the field, silver coins were often included in survival kits. What science later confirmed is that silver ions, when in contact with water, can interfere with the metabolic processes of bacteria and other microorganisms. They penetrate the cell walls of harmful organisms and block essential functions needed for survival and reproduction. At very low concentrations, levels that are completely safe for humans, silver can deactivate a wide range of organisms responsible for waterborne diseases, including some of the most common ones found in rural areas without treated water systems. The amount needed is minimal. You don't need to dissolve the silver. You don't need to crush it or heat it. Simply placing a piece of silver in the water for a few hours is enough to release a small amount of ions and produce an antimicrobial effect. And it doesn't noticeably change the taste of the water. That's one of the reasons this method has lasted for generations without needing scientific explanation. It worked. It didn't affect flavor, and any household with a piece of silver could use it. But there's something important you need to understand about this second element, something that took me time to fully grasp in practice. Silver does not replace filtration. It completes filtration. If you place silver into cloudy water full of organic material, the result will be far less effective than if you use it on water that has already been filtered through charcoal and sand. That's because suspended organic particles consume the silver ions before they can act on microorganisms. The correct sequence is always the same. Filter first, then expose the water to silver. That order cannot be reversed. And that's exactly the order described in military survival manuals. And the same order my ancestors followed, even without understanding the science behind it, but fully understanding the result. There's a variation of this method that my grandfather used to talk about for situations where silver wasn't available, and that brings me to the third element of the system, one that comes straight from the forest, and that surprises most people the first time they hear about it. There are certain types of tree bark that, when placed in water, release compounds with natural antimicrobial properties. In North America, for example, some indigenous communities used bark from trees like oak and certain pine species, which contain tannins and other phenolic compounds known to inhibit bacterial growth in water. These weren't random choices. They were the result of generations of observation and practice. My grandfather used these barks in a very simple way. He would collect them, wash them thoroughly to remove any surface residue, and then placed small pieces into a clay container filled with already filtered water. After a few hours, usually from late afternoon to early morning, The water was ready to drink. He couldn't explain it in scientific terms, but he knew it worked, because he had tested it, observed it, compared it. And the people around him drank that water without getting sick, even during times when rivers and ponds were compromised by flooding or long dry spells. Now, it's important to be clear about something. We're talking about emergency and survival knowledge. This is a field method, something meant for situations where other options aren't available. It's not a replacement for modern sanitation systems under normal conditions. But for someone living out in the country, producing their own food, wanting real independence, and knowing what to do when systems fail, this knowledge can make the difference between staying well and getting sick. And that kind of independence, that ability to act using what nature provides instead of waiting for an outside solution, is exactly what traditional farming has always taught. When you truly understand the land, when you learn its cycles, when you recognize the natural resources around you, you stop depending on others to solve your most basic problems. And water is the most basic problem there is. Let me tell you something that stuck with me from when I was younger, before I had the land I have today. I used to work on a farm out in the countryside, helping an older man take care of his vegetable garden and orchard. This man had a spring on his property, a clean one, coming up through the roots of an old cedar tree. And every single day, before using that water for anything, he would run it through a sand and charcoal filter he had built himself inside an old wooden box. At the time, I thought it was overkill. I asked him once why he filtered water from a spring that looked so clean, and he looked at me with that calm expression of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone, and said, "Son, the water you see isn't the same water you drink. What enters through your eyes is not what enters your body. Learn to see what doesn't show." It took me years to fully understand what he meant, because he wasn't just talking about water. He was talking about a whole way of seeing nature. Appearance is not reality. Clarity is not safety. And the solution to what you can't see isn't found in lab-made products. It's found in understanding how nature purifies itself. Rivers that run over gravel beds are naturally cleaner than those flowing over clay. Why? Because gravel and sand act as a physical filter over miles. Wetlands filter heavy metals from water. Dense vegetation zones absorb nitrates and other pollutants. Nature has purification systems far more sophisticated than anything humans have built in a lab. What people living off the land learned over centuries was how to replicate those systems on a smaller scale, using the same materials, following the same principles. The layered charcoal filter is a direct imitation of what happens when rainwater slowly percolates through the soil until it reaches groundwater. Along the way, it passes through layers of dirt, sand, clay, organic matter, and porous rock. Each layer does part of the work. By the time it reaches deep underground, it's filtered, not necessarily sterilized. That's a different step, but filtered. And that's where the complementary elements come in. Silver, bark, charcoal itself with its microbial effects, and other resources that ancient cultures identified through generations of real-world experience. Now there's something most people don't connect, but it matters more than they think. The quality of the water you use in your garden directly affects the quality of the food you grow. It sounds obvious when you say it like that. But in practice, most people growing food at home never think about it. They think about fertilizer, pruning, spacing, pests, but not water. And the water you use carries everything in it. If it contains excess minerals, the plant absorbs those minerals. If it carries decomposing organic compounds, the plant absorbs part of that too. If it contains residues from nearby agricultural chemicals, those can end up in your plants as well. When you start paying attention to the quality of your irrigation water and begin improving it using simple natural filtration, you start noticing changes in your garden that you can't immediately explain. The plants grow stronger. The leaves take on a deeper color. The taste of the food changes, not because you switched fertilizer, not because you changed how often you water, but because the water reaching the roots is cleaner, more balanced, closer to what nature provides when water moves naturally through the soil. My grandfather used to grow tomatoes with a flavor I've never found anywhere else. And I spent years trying to figure out why, what fertilizer he used, what variety he planted, what the secret was. Until the day I realized something simple. He watered his garden with filtered spring water, every single day, with care, with attention, with the same respect he gave every other part of growing food. Water wasn't a detail. It was the foundation. Now, I want to show you how to build this system at home, using materials that almost anyone already has or can easily find, without spending money. The main filter, the 5-layer system I described, can be assembled in a single afternoon. You'll need a large plastic bottle, the kind that holds half a gallon or a gallon, with the bottom cut off to serve as the water entry point. The cap stays on the bottom, with a few small holes punched into it, so the filtered water can drain out. You place this container upside down, resting it over another container that will collect the filtered water. Inside the bottle, in its inverted position, you arrange the layers in this order, starting from what is now the top opening. First, a layer of straw, cloth or dry grass to catch larger debris. Below that, a layer of fine sand. Then a thicker layer of crushed charcoal in small pieces. Below the charcoal, another layer of sand, this time coarser. And at the very bottom, near the perforated cap, a layer of gravel or small river stones. When you pour water into the top, it travels through these layers and exits filtered at the bottom. The first few passes may still come out slightly cloudy, because the layers need time to settle and start working properly. After 2 or 3 initial runs, the water begins to come out with the clarity you're expecting. For the silver step, you simply place the filtered water into a container and submerge a piece of silver you already have at home, a coin, a spoon, a ring, or part of a chain. Historical accounts suggest a minimum contact time of about 6 hours. For daily use in field conditions, many people would leave it from dusk until dawn to ensure enough time for the antimicrobial effect to take place. One important detail: the silver object must be clean before going into the water. Not cleaned with chemical products, because those can contaminate the water, but cleaned physically, using a dry cloth or even coarse sand to remove oxidation and surface residue. The surface of the silver should be as exposed as possible. No varnish, no paint, no coating of another metal. Pure silver or high percentage silver works best. Silver-plated items are far less effective because the active surface is minimal. For those who don't have access to silver, the plant-based alternative I mentioned earlier can be used as a complementary method. In the US, certain types of tree bark, like oak bark, can serve a similar purpose due to their tannin content. You use small pieces of the inner bark, the lighter and more fibrous layer between the outer bark and the wood. This bark should be dried in the sun for a few days before use, which helps concentrate the active compounds and improves preservation. Stored in a dry place, it can last for months without losing effectiveness. There are other natural materials worth mentioning within this same principle. Moringa seeds, for example, originally from Africa, but now grown in warmer regions of the United States, have flocculating and antimicrobial properties well documented by modern science, though they've been used for centuries in traditional practices across Africa and Asia. When you crush a few moringa seeds and mix them into cloudy water, suspended particles begin to clump together and settle at the bottom within minutes. This natural clarification process, known as flocculation, follows the same principle used in modern water treatment plants, except those rely on synthetic chemicals instead of natural seeds. There are many other plants with similar properties. The knowledge of natural water purification is not limited to one region. It exists in different forms across cultures, preserved by communities that had to rely on their own solutions long before modern sanitation systems existed. This knowledge wasn't abandoned because it was inferior. It was set aside because more convenient solutions came along. Products that are easier to buy, faster to use, more comfortable. But convenience is not the same as effectiveness, and dependence is not the same as a solution. When you know how to work with what nature provides, you gain something no store-bought product can give you: the ability to remain independent even when those products are no longer available. That's the core principle behind everything I've learned from the land. Independence doesn't mean isolation. It means capability. It means knowing how to use what's around you. It means not panicking when systems fail, because you already know the alternative path. My grandfather didn't rely on store-bought filters because he knew how to build his own. He didn't rely on pharmacy medicine for most things because he understood the plants around him. He didn't depend on industrial fertilizers because he knew how to compost, how to mulch, how to rotate crops. He was a free man within the limits of his time. And today, when I see people buying faucet filters that break after a few months and need expensive replacements all the time, it feels like something was lost. Not technology, the ability to act without it. Now, I want to show you a direct application of this system that goes beyond drinking water. Most people who grow food at home use tap water for irrigation, and that water has been treated with chlorine. Chlorine is added to kill harmful microorganisms, which is good for human health. But chlorine doesn't distinguish between harmful and beneficial organisms. When you water your garden with chlorinated water, you're introducing a substance that interferes with the soil's microbiology. And that microbiology is essential for plant health. Beneficial microorganisms in the soil break down organic matter into nutrients that roots can absorb. Mycorrhizal fungi form underground networks that expand the plant's ability to take in water and nutrients. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria enrich the soil in ways no synthetic fertilizer can fully replicate. When you regularly pour chlorinated water into this ecosystem, you gradually weaken the microbial life in your soil, even if you're adding organic compost. It's like watering a garden with a low dose of poison. It takes time, but the effects will show. The simplest solution for this is to let tap water sit in an open container for at least an hour before using it for irrigation. Chlorine is a gas dissolved in the water, and it naturally evaporates when the water is exposed to air. That's the most basic method. To further improve the quality of your irrigation water, you can run it through a charcoal filter before using it in your garden. Charcoal is highly effective at capturing chlorine compounds. Even a single layer of charcoal, without the full filter system, is enough to significantly reduce chlorine levels. And here's something most people don't realize. Water that has passed through charcoal isn't just cleaner. It's slightly enriched with trace elements that the charcoal releases in small amounts during filtration. These trace elements, including small amounts of potassium and phosphorus, are exactly the kind of subtle nutrition plants absorb when water naturally moves through forest soil. It's not a significant form of fertilization in terms of quantity, but it creates a more balanced composition, closer to natural rainwater and very different from treated tap water. When you start paying attention to these details, when you begin to see soil as a living ecosystem instead of an inert medium that just receives fertilizer, you start seeing your garden in a completely different way, and you begin to realize that every decision matters. From the quality of your water to the way you remove a weed, everything affects that ecosystem in ways you may not have noticed before. My grandfather used to say that a farmer who learns to see the land as a living organism, not just a resource, will never need to buy fertility again. Because when you take care of the ecosystem produces fertility on its own. And when you use the right water, in the right way, at the right time, the land responds in a way no packaged product can replicate. Now let me share something else about the soldier's method, something that will likely change how you think about water treatment. The survival manuals from World War II didn't just describe filtration and silver as separate steps. They included a third step, one that most modern versions of this method have completely left out. That third step was sun exposure. After filtering and treating the water with silver or plant-based antimicrobial agents, soldiers were instructed to place the water in a transparent container and leave it under direct sunlight for a minimum of 6 hours on a clear day. Heat, and especially ultraviolet radiation from the sun, has a proven effect in inactivating a wide range of harmful microorganisms in still water. This method was rediscovered and formally documented in the 1990s under the name SODIS, solar water disinfection, and today it's recommended by global health organizations as an accessible purification method in regions without proper sanitation infrastructure. But long before it had a name, farmers, indigenous communities, and rural populations living in sunny regions were already using this principle. Leaving water in the sun was simply part of the routine. They didn't know the science, but they knew the result. When you combine all three steps, layered charcoal filtration, treatment with a natural antimicrobial agent like silver or plant bark, and solar exposure, you create a purification system that addresses three different types of contamination. Physical filtration removes particles and part of the microorganisms through mechanical capture. The antimicrobial agent neutralizes what passes through the filter, and solar exposure enhances that process with ultraviolet radiation, especially effective against viruses and protozoa that may be more resistant to silver or plant-based treatments. This is a complete system, not a trick, not superstition, a practical application of multiple purification principles that modern science has confirmed, but that traditional knowledge mastered through experience over centuries. Now think about this for a moment. How many situations have you faced, or could you face, where this knowledge would matter? A drought that affects well water quality, a flood that contaminates previously clean sources, a failure in the municipal water system, a long stay on rural land without treated water, a camping trip, a retreat, a moment where you have to rely on what you know, not on what you can buy. In every one of these situations, the system I just showed you works, not just as a last resort, but as a daily practice for those who understand that water, no matter where it comes from, must be treated with attention and respect. And there's one more thing I want to make clear before we close this. At first glance, building the filter, using silver, and managing sun exposure might seem like a lot of work. But once it becomes part of your routine, it takes less than 10 minutes a day. You build the filter once, and it lasts for months, needing only occasional cleaning of the layers. You clean the silver object from time to time with simple physical friction. You leave the container in the sun while you go about your other tasks. It's not complicated, it's simple. It's the kind of simplicity that people in the past mastered, because they understood what truly mattered. Do you know what separates those who grow food with real independence from those who still depend entirely on external systems? It's not land size, it's not money, it's not technology, it's knowledge. More specifically, practical knowledge. How to solve the fundamental problems of food production using what nature provides. Clean water is one of those fundamental problems, and now you know how to solve it, without depending on anything you'd need to buy, or anything that could break and stop working. Every piece of knowledge you gain in this direction is a step toward real independence. Not the romantic version you see in movies, where everything is perfect all the time, but real independence. The kind built in the details, in daily practice, in mistakes that teach, in repetition that strengthens, in observation that reveals. That's the kind of independence the land teaches, if you're willing to learn. And I'm still here, with the same intention I've always had, to share what I've learned. Because this kind of knowledge has no value when it's kept to yourself. It only matters when it moves, when it passes from one hand to another, when someone who learns today teaches their child tomorrow, when a chain that was almost broken by modern agriculture starts to be rebuilt by people who decide they're not going to let this knowledge disappear. If you've made it this far with me, I want to tell you something with complete honesty. You're not alone in this journey. There are people all over the world walking this same path, trying to recover what was lost, wanting to grow real food, wanting to understand the land instead of just exploiting it, wanting to know what to do when the system fails. This channel exists because of those people. Because of you. If you're not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Because there's still a lot more to cover: seeds, living soil, natural pest control, how to build a garden that produces year-round with less and less intervention, fermentation, food preservation, rainwater harvesting, companion planting. This channel is a repository of knowledge that modern life nearly erased. And each video is another piece of the bigger picture you're building. If this video brought you something valuable, go ahead and like it. Not for the number, but because it helps this reach people who are searching for exactly what you just found here. Every like opens a door for someone who hasn't discovered this path yet. What you've learned today about natural water purification is not just a technical skill. It's part of a larger way of living. A way of living with nature instead of against it. A way of producing food by understanding the systems that sustain life in the soil, in the water, in the air. A way of becoming someone who doesn't panic when external systems fail, because you know that within your own land, within your ability to observe and act, there is everything you need to keep going. That's the kind of self-reliance my grandfather had. It wasn't about wealth. It was about clarity, knowledge, capability. The kind of wealth that doesn't disappear when banks fail. That doesn't spoil when the power goes out. That doesn't run out when supply trucks stop coming. It's the kind of wealth you carry with you wherever you go. The kind you can pass on without losing it. The kind that grows when it's shared. I'll see you in the next video. Take care of your land with respect, and it will take care of you in return.